Hey everyone, Tankenstein here. We have some somewhat unexpected news today. We are getting APHE shell changes in War Thunder that might make them a little bit more powerful in some ways, but a little bit weaker in other ways. Looks like kind of an overall buff for people that use them properly, and a nerf for people that, kind of take cheeky shots at cupolas, so to speak. So that said, let's go over this, and I'll try my best to explain what these changes are supposed to do. And these are not necessarily going to happen. They will come to War Thunder based on your vote. So that being said, of course, it says today we'll be talking about changes to the post-pen effects for APHE shells. Now, interestingly, it really, as far as I know, only mentions APHE in this article. I wonder if it's similar shells like APCBC, APBC, if I'm not mistaken, all the similar shells to APHE. And it says, used by ground vehicles that we plan to introduce into the game. We're ready to show you what we have planned here, and at the end of this news post, you can participate in voting for or against. Whether there will be changes or not depends on your vote. Let's take a look. So it says, first off, we'd like to tell you, and I'm going to read this verbatim, mind you, at least for the first part, because it's pretty interesting how they kind of explain this. And it says, first off, we'd like to tell you about a change that we consider necessary and will be implemented into the game without any vote. This change relates to maintaining the integrity of an APHE's shell head after armor penetration. When an APHE shell explodes, its warhead is not subject to significant fragmentation and can cause substantially greater damage than the scattering fragments of the case and base. The fragment of the shell's warhead is significant in mass, can penetrate armor of considerable thickness, and at the same time also form secondary fragments when penetrating armor. I think they're talking about spalling from APHE. This change will allow the warhead to better hit enemy crew members located behind internal partitions, such as the engine compartment bulkhead, as well as other modules along the shell's flight trajectory that cannot be penetrated by small fragments generated from the shell exploding. So basically, what I'm thinking that this means is that they're going to add into the APHE's damage, kind of like an AP level of damage, so to speak. So instead of just going in and blowing up, this will go in and also have, again, an AP level of damage. So it'll go in, blow up, but the front of that shell will still be kind of causing straight line damage, if that makes any level of sense, from what I can tell here, or give or take frontline damage. So it'll kind of have like two effects instead of currently more or less just one. So it seems like this is an overall buff to APHE shells because it's kind of like an AP in a way, because like, you know how those go in and then they just kind of more or less spall a little bit, and they also damage in a straight line. This will do that, as well as, of course, the standard blowy up emotion. Now, it says here, increasing secondary fragments and a high explosive damage. Due to a number of technical reasons, secondary fragments from APHE shells differ and are worse compared to fragments from regular solid AP shells. Again, spalling as far as what I could tell. When reworking fragmentation fields will enhance the secondary fragments of APHE shells to the level of solid AP shells. The high explosive damage from APHE shells will remain. It causes relatively little damage, affects the crew of modules inside the tank, and has a damage zone in the form of a sphere around the detonation point of the shell. The diameter of the damaged sphere and high explosive damage is noticeably smaller than the scattering zone of secondary fragments. So basically they're saying that the AP effect for a shell going into a tank, so again, kind of like when it penetrates and all the spalling, that is a lot more damaging than the high explosive portion of the shell, if that makes any level of sense. So it says, implementing fragment areas. Here are the changes that we'd like you to vote on. Whether they're introduced or not will be determined by the community vote. Scattering sectors of fragments from APHE shells. When a shell explodes, three main fragmentation areas are formed, shown in the image below. The fragment of the shell's head and its fragments, or the remainder of the shell head and its fragments, fragments from the base of the shell, and fragments from all sides of the shell, the case. So basically, forward, back, side to side. That's more or less kind of what it's saying here. Not in a perfect sphere, but more or less, again, kind of like a T shape, if you will. And it says, when a shell explodes inside of a tank, or armored vehicle, the shell's head acts as a small, solid AP round and may penetrate more internal modules. Again, that's kind of what I was saying before. Alongside this, smaller fragments from the shell casing form a fragmentation cone and hit the crew and module around the explosion point. We plan to implement both of these to the game. At the moment, we use a simplified fragmentation pattern for APHE shells in the game without segmentation into different areas. If we were to implement the proposed physically reliable sector fragmentation patterns for APHE shells, the post-pen effect of APHE shells will be more realistic. However, when hitting protruding modules such as the commander's cupola, the probability of crew damage would also be reduced. So basically, I don't know if you guys can see this, but it's pretty interesting. This is what it currently is, right? So it shows basically a perfect sphere around the shell. That's how it currently blows up. What it will be is that it will still have that sphere. It'll be a smaller sphere, but it will do substantially more damage to the front, right? Like, I mean, a lot more damage to where basically where the shell initially impacts. And it'll do a good amount of damage to the sides and also a good amount to the rear. More damage to the sides and the rear than it would do basically to the corners, if that makes any level of sense. So basically, anything in front of the APHE shell, or again, I'm assuming similar shells like APCBC, things like that, it'll go in and then blow up and basically annihilate anyone in front of it. However, also to the sides and rear, there will be a slightly reduced level of damage, but it won't be too substantial. And then, of course, to the corners will be a pretty substantial amount of damage because they're almost seemingly reducing the HE effect of the shell, if that makes any sense, but they're not really reducing it more. They're just kind of making it more so realistic. So in the immediate vicinity, it's still pretty much going to kill anything. However, again, this is going to be a hell of a lot stronger shooting forward and a bit weaker kind of to the sides and also quite a bit weaker to the corners, just because, again, that's going to be a more realistic way that these things blow up. And what I said before is that this will be interesting because, of course, you could shoot the cupola and you can get yourself a crazy kill. This might actually make the T-28, for example, or the T-95, basically the Doom Toodles, much more powerful, because what people would do before is they would rely on those and the APHE just kind of blowing up inside the tank and killing. However, that HE shell, the HE portion of it, is going to be a lot less impactful. It says, reworking the post-pen effects of APHE shells can change the tactics of the game, making protruding weakened areas less vulnerable. However, at the same time, post-pen effects after penetrating the hull of the vehicle due to the preservation of the shell's head after the shell explodes will be increased. So again, I feel like this is actually going to make it so that, again, I mean, it's going to be very interesting. So like these really long tanks, for example, like a TOG-2 or the Char 2C, if you hit those with APHE, it's going to be a lot more effective versus those tanks now, because it's going to just keep on going through, and the HE portion of the shell will still damage the really close-in crew members, but this is basically going to make it so that, like, again, hitting a really random spot in a tank won't necessarily result in a kill now. However, hitting it, like, in a good spot, like a more realistic spot, again, like the front of the tank, will now kill a little bit more, if that makes any level of sense. And they do actually have some really useful examples here. So this is the post-pen effect when penetrating the center of a tank without preserving the head of the shell before versus preserving the head of the shell, so after. So this is versus a Tiger 1H, it looks like, right? It doesn't have the top-mounted LMG. Not that that matters too much, but this is a Tiger 1H. So let's go ahead and check what this is. So this is before. So as you can see, it does a good amount of damage pretty much to everyone. And this is based on the ASU-57 shell, so it doesn't have too much HE filler in it. And now this is after. So as you can see, it does a little bit less damage to the people next to it, but it destroys the engine, kills these two guys because they're pretty much all in the line of it. However, here, it doesn't damage the engine, and it does more like red damage here, 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 here. So again, it does less damage around it. However, if you're in the path of it, it's going to kill. And that's again with a 57mm shell. Now this is with a Tiger H1 versus a Tiger H1. It says post-pen effect when the commander's cupola is hit by a spherical spread of fragments from a shell explosion before versus hit with a physically reliable sectoral scattering of fragments from the shell explosion after. So again, before, this is the Commander's Cupola hit. And after, it hardly does anything. So Commander's Cupolas will be a little bit less of a, of something that you have to worry about. They still will kill the Commander, of course, oftentimes, but this basically means that it's, again, not going to do as much damage around the shell, but in certain sectors like front, back, side to side, it's going to do more damage, and less damage around the corners, if that makes any sense. So HE effects will do a little bit less, but the shells will do a bit more going forward. So again, they're going to act more like AP shells and a little bit less like APHE, if that makes any level of sense. So this is basically, again, to make it more realistic than it was prior, because again, they used a very simplified thing. So this is the prior, and this is again the new. And this is what you'll be voting on if you opt in to vote for this. So you'll be switching from this to this. Again, I feel like it's going to reward skill, and it's going to kind of make it so that some tanks are a little bit better after this. Again, those with protruding cupolas, whereas the tanks that maybe don't have those weaknesses might end up being about the same, or maybe even a touch worse, relatively speaking. But again, they are still going to, regardless of what you guys say, introduce the enhanced AP aspect of the APHE shell. So again, it's going to do more damage going forward, if that makes a level of sense, but that's pretty much it. So again, this is what you're going to be voting on, but regardless of if you vote or not, they are still going to introduce the fact that APHE shells are going to have a fragmenting head that will now do more damage going forward. It's just kind of what the damage after the HE portion of the APHE shell, that's what you're voting on. So that said, hopefully I wasn't too, I didn't confuse you guys too much. But either way, let me know what you guys think about this in the comments below. I will try to link the this in the comments below so that you guys can vote on it. But thanks again for watching. I'll see you all on the other side. Take care, everyone.